workshop, a joint workshop with the City Council and the Planning and Zoning Commission. So we want to thank those Planning and Zoning Commission members that are here with us today to discuss this. So this is for our comprehensive plan update. So we appreciate our Planning and Zoning Department being here as well to present on this, and obviously our wonderful City Clerk is here with us as well this evening. So with that, I don't know, do we need to do a roll call? Good idea. Okay, should we start with Planning and Zoning, and then we'll go into the City Council?
Warren. Larson. Boutros.
Here.
Whitbeck.
Here.
And Harmon.
Here.
Very good.
Doty.
Here.
Williams.
Here.
Dittenberg.
Here.
Allgood.
Here.
Very good. Thank you so much for that. We appreciate that. And just to note, Councilor Stoddard and Councilor.
Yet, but the most complex and probably challenging chapter to talk about is the land use chapter and the future land use map. So we're going to focus on that tonight. Before you are just some handouts to follow along with, but also to take home to have for reference for after the workshop. And then if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to our department and we'll happily schedule a meeting to meet with you one-on-one and we can go through it in more detail. So what we're going to start with is the comprehensive plan book that's here. Just a couple highlights before we get into the consultant that's on the phone. This page, let's see, it's about like the fourth page back. It kind of looks like this. This is a really good page to look at because it really tells you like the different land use designations on the left, and on the top it tells you the different land use types. And you'll notice, and then there's a description on the next page of what those mean. So like when it talks about mixed use development, it'll give you a definition of what that means. But looking at those land use designations across the top kind of helps give you an idea of what's going to be allowed in there. Because what we used to know as mixed use is not necessarily what you're going to see in here. There's a different definition for that. The dark bubbles are what your primary or principal uses that we want to see within what we call a place type, so that designation like of neighborhood 1 or neighborhood 2, and the consultant will go through that in more detail. And then the light gray bubbles are more supporting uses. So supporting doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be the single use on a parcel. It just means that we don't want that use to be the primary use within that area. So we'll be looking at those types of things. So they'll be secondary in that area. After the consultant does a brief update of that, he'll provide an update for about 15-20 minutes. Then our senior planner, Joe Dodson, will come up and he's gonna go through, he has a presentation that'll also reference this little zoning code update book that we gave you. The codes are not in here that he's updating. These are photos. The background on this is that we reached out to Cushing, and Angela is here from Cushing Terrell, and thank you so much for this. And we had them do some visuals for us to look at on existing building within Caldwell. Most of you will probably recognize what it is. But then what that building could look like if we were to adopt and implement the codes that Joe will be going over with you. Which is anything from color to materials to landscaping to setbacks to height. So there's a whole realm of stuff that we're looking at, and we are looking for your feedback and comments tonight, but also moving forward until adoption. The land use plan that's in front of you, it's all nice and pretty colored. I just want to explain a couple things really that are highlights of this. Everything in the green that you see on the land use map are large lot residential. So those are your rural and semi-rural lots. We've added a lot to that. We've made a lot of the stuff around the lake. Also up here to the north, on the north side of the Boise River, out by the golf course, and then also over here to the boundaries of Canyon County. So we've added quite a bit of area for opportunities for custom homes. Within the yellow colors, those are your residential zones or designations. One highlight that we'll be putting in the code is that you can have neighborhood commercial uses on the major intersections. where right now we don't have that, and so we have a lot of residential that's really far from services. Well, we're gonna have a lot of services available for them now in this proposed plan. And then, of course, along your major corridors, the pink and the orange indicates a lot of mixed use or community center zones, which are gonna have a lot of your retail, restaurant, could have a lot more mixed use for residential. One thing you will notice in the plan, we are proposing a lot more density in the urban core. There's two reasons for that. One is when you provide density within your core, it provides less drain on services because you're not spread out. It helps to save the agricultural land, and it also helps prevent sprawl. So in the center of our community, we are proposing more density, but to accommodate that density, we are also proposing more landscape buffering, more design and site and building design requirements. So those will be coming before council to take a look at as well. And then lastly, this is just a small version of the large pictures that you have so that they're side by side. Quite the difference in the visuals, pretty impressive. And so some of the things that we want to be able to talk about with council, not necessarily tonight, but moving forward, is the comfort level with the council on this comp plan. Are there areas that we can potentially have multifamily or whatever, not necessarily need a special use permit? Is there a comfort level with council by the time we get done with this entire process that some of these could just go through a design review, as long as council's comfortable with the proposed requirements that we'll bring forward? And so I think I'm gonna turn that, do we know if Joe is online? Okay. If there's any questions for me, I'm happy to answer those. I also wanna thank Morgan. She has worked really tirelessly on this comprehensive plan. She has managed this project all along, and so we could not have done this without her. So I will turn that over to Joe unless you guys have any questions for me.
Is there any questions at this time?
Not our Joe, Joe Moss, I'm
Yes.
sorry, from Logan Simpson is on the line. He's our consultant on the comprehensive plan, and he's gonna go through a little bit of that with you.
Okay, very good. I don't see any questions at this time, so, and if you do have a question, just please do push your button. I'll see the green light on there, and we'll get those answered, so. Okay, Joe, what was your last name? Sorry?
My last name is Moss.
What was that? Sorry.
My
Moss.
last name is Moss.
Moss, okay. If you would go ahead and just please introduce yourself, and then we'll turn it over to you.
Great. Are you all able to see my screen, by the way?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So I am Joe Moss. I'm with Logan Simpson, and we've been working with the city staff on the plan to get your draft in front of you today. We're going to be going through a couple of different things on this, primarily the land use chapter. But I did want to give you a quick snapshot of where we're at in the process. So we've been working on this for quite some time. We're down in phase 3 here, getting close to the adoption process. We also have we have been doing a lot of public outreach throughout the process. Back last February, we had a big visioning week at the Caldwell train depot. We also had another public event this summer back at the airport where we went through some of the choices that could possibly come out of this plan with the community. So just to let you know a little bit about the process, we've been taking all of that public input and some of the data and analyses that we've been learning and pulling those into a vision, values, goals, and policies. And so in the plan, you'll see, obviously, we're going to go through that land use map and strategy today, but there's also actions and strategies coming in Chapter 8, which are our next draft chapter that staff's currently reviewing. Just a reminder that this is the vision statement that we landed on with the community, and then the kind of 5 themes of this plan. So Caldwell honors its heritage and embraces its future through thoughtful growth, mixture of housing, accessible community connections, and distinct spaces. So then from that, we've got these 5 different themes that reflect on a number of different things. So a connected community, vibrant gathering spaces where rivers, parks, and agriculture meet, quality neighborhoods to call home, and intentional and distinct centers. And so the plan is actually organized around these 5 themes. This land, one big map. So in this introductory section, this goes through some of the different tools and describes those and what we've included in these place type sections. So gives you a little bit more information about how these all come together. Robin kind of also explained this matrix here, showing the primary and supporting land uses. This is intended to just give you a quick overview of what kinds of activities can happen in these different place types. So you can see they kind of vary from sort of less intense to more intense along the way, and these different sections have different these different place types have different levels of intensity anticipated within them. This is intended to give a really flexible strategy as to determining what's appropriate while still being able to create a cohesive and coherent community. So just to give you an idea of some of the components that are in this place type description, we have obviously the name and an illustration for each of these place types, giving you kind of a sense of what type of development we're envisioning. Again, these are illustrations, so they're not necessarily a specific place, but we do know that this is the sort of look and feel that we're envisioning with these place types. We do also give that a narrative description in the upper right corner there, showing this place type. And then there's a little infographic there with the general level of infrastructure and services that are needed for that type of development. So this one is the community center, and it's on the higher end because it's a more intense development pattern than some others. Down here at the bottom, this next spread, we have a big design characteristics section here in the far bottom left corner here. That goes through the general kind of urban design aspects of what we would be seeing in these place types, including build. I wanted to call attention to the health intersections. One of the components of this plan is that we have been looking at public health. This plan's been partially funded by a grant from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Idaho. And so we wanted to make sure that we really showed what the impacts to public health would be with these different place types. Finally, in the lower right-hand corner here, we have the actual land use component. There's kind of a little description of what land uses would fit in this place type, as well as a list of some existing zoning districts that would be compatible with those, with that land use vision. Then we do have kind of a pull out of that matrix where we're showing what are the primary and supporting uses down at the bottom here. But I wanted to bring your attention to this colored bar here. This is showing the envisioned mix of uses. So, while institutions, for instance, are a supporting use in this particular place type, we don't envision it being a major component of the place type. They might exist within there. You might have a library or something like that in a community-centered place type designation. However, it's not primarily an institutional place type. So this is just meant to give a general idea of the level of, or the types of mixes of land uses we're hoping to see in these particular designations. I guess before I get started and going through some of these, does anybody have any questions on the actual categories and how they're to be used?
Any questions?
This would be a way to have that transition from a urban to a rural area. One of the things that are included is a density bonus. We're hoping in that program that it would recommend something like cluster development, where you can preserve open space and kind of move some of the other development closer together, which makes it more economical to service in the long term, but also preserve that open space, which we know is really important to the identity of Caldwell. We also have a lower service need in these areas as they're farther out and harder to service and more expensive to service. So this land use would support that type of fiscal responsibility in the long term. Neighborhood 2 is a little bit more developed. Obviously, it's going to be where most of your traditional neighborhood patterns would fit into, but it does allow for some flexibility for some additional density or intensity, at areas that are appropriate for that. This illustration shows, maybe there's some townhomes or something on one of those arterial roadways versus the neighborhoods beyond, which are lower density that way. But it also has limited commercial services on some of those corners. So if somebody wanted to build a corner store, they could do that in this particular place type. It's not something we would envision, massive office building, but it definitely would be those sort of neighborhood services that we're hoping to get. You can see in the land use mix that it's primarily residential, and then there's that kind of just a little bit of commercial that would help support these neighborhoods so they're not completely solely residential use. Neighborhood 3 gets a little bit more intense, and these are generally in areas where those neighborhood 2 are transitioning to more commercial areas or more intense areas. So it just kind of with some infill to allow, some of those integrated commercial uses. I think if you think a little bit about maybe like the north end of Boise, where there's kind of a mixture of those different, residential and commercial components, that would be the sort of mix we would see in these areas. But again, it's still a primarily residential place type. Getting into the community center here, this is our first primarily commercial place type, but it does allow a lot of mixed use as well, and there's still some residential. We see that those residential uses could be a really great way to transition from those commercial areas to less intense areas where, might be more primarily residential neighborhoods. We see these primarily along commercial corridors. So the map here is showing them quite a lot on Karcher, Ustick, and up by the river, which would kind of help support some of that community function. The intent would be that this is maybe the closest grocery store to your home, right? So this would be where you go to get a gallon of milk. Stepping that up a bit, we do have this mixed use center, which looks at how we can have a variety of uses at a higher intensity, primarily for the mix of abilities to, the mix of uses and the things you can do there. This would provide a similar level of mix of uses that would hopefully help activate some of that commercial and provide additional housing opportunities. But again, it is a primarily commercial and mixed use place type. So that would be what you mostly see in these areas. Downtown is unique. So we decided to give it its own place type, given that it is a more historic development style and generally a different kind of scale than what you might see along some of those other commercial corridors. So again, we kind of point that out in the streets and scaling and massing. And then, obviously it has a different sort of density range that's a little bit higher. Again, as Robin mentioned, we're trying to focus that density toward areas where it is most appropriate. And, downtown would be maybe the most intense development style that we have here. Next one is the only one that doesn't have any residential components so that we've seen so far. This is the employment center, and it is, again, going to be your kind of primarily jobs-focused place type. We know that there's a number of different areas in town that this is, established and encouraged, and we want to help support that economic base of the city. So you find this primarily around the airport and up in that northwest quadrant. But you will notice that compared to maybe the future land use map that currently exists, this has been pulled back away from the river a little bit more to give those areas a little more space to breathe without this kind of development. Finally, our last place type was the special purpose. There's a couple of places in town that are unique, kind of one-offs that have very unique and specific needs. So those are the hospital, the airport, the college. Also, we have on here some of the county infrastructure, just adjacent to downtown. These areas are special in the fact that, that they have different needs than a normal place type, and they kind of have to be considered as a one-off almost, and what is appropriate for this particular use and this particular need. So when we put that all together, that's what our future land use map looks like. Again, we have some of these area hubs, and I want to point out we've got them along, major areas. So you have ones near the college over here. We've got 10th and Ustick. We've got Ustick and the freeway over here at the boulevard, as well as Midland and Highway 26 over here. And another one up here by the freeway interchange up this north end. And then another one over here that is not necessarily on those major arterials, but we see that there's not really anything along that stretch. So we think that this one might have some potential to be a little bit more intense in a residential sense, and maybe have some of those more limited commercial services than you would see in other parts of that neighborhood 2 designation. Giving that a little bit closer look, you can see how that comes together. Again, we've maintained neighborhood 1 in a lot of those border areas where we're looking to limit, extensive infrastructure. And then you'll see that the community center is being utilized around the Boise River, which is another thing that is really important. One other change I would want to point out to you as well is that we've sort of expanded the footprint of the downtown place type. So this goes all the way up to Chicago, out to Centennial. So we pushed this out a little bit and made it bigger because, there's a lot of things going well in downtown. How do we, keep that going and let it grow over time? So we've expanded that place type geography. Looking at the south end of the city, again, you can see that Karcher is primarily those commercial uses, the mixture of community center and mixed use center. But then one thing I really wanted to point out too is I think right now Farmway is kind of where most development ends on moving west. We recognize that as a arterial roadway, it's very likely that both sides of Farmway will eventually develop. So we put both sides of Farmway in neighborhood 2 for the most part, but we didn't want that to be in permanence, right? So we did kind of say, hey, while we see along that corridor it being a more neighborhood 2, it's going to transition to that lower intensity neighborhood 1 once you get off of that corridor. So we've also looked at 2026. You can see that's a mixed use primarily area, transitions out with neighborhood 3 into those neighborhood 2 areas to the north and south. But did also want to give you an idea of what's next. So that's everything we had in chapter 2, but we do have a couple of things coming up on our schedule. We've got a committee meeting, our final one coming up next week, and we're going to be taking their comments and making some tweaks to the plan. We're going to be going into a public review period, and then we'll have a couple of public events here in December, and then we will be making those final edits based off of the feedback that we're hearing before this will head into a more formal adoption process. So that's what I had for you this evening. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Joe. Appreciate that. Questions, Councilor Doty?
No questions, just a couple comments, Mr. Mayor, and I think it's good for the council to know. I think I've been on this for, it's been 8 or 12 months. I don't know, Robin, help me out. How long, Morgan? 8, 12 months?
October of 23.
Okay, I didn't know it was that long, so maybe a year I've been on this. And so there's just a couple of things that I just want everybody to know at this next meeting that I will bring up, plus you just heard they're gonna take your comments, and then, of course, there'll be official public hearings about it. But 2 things I wanna consider is making a ordinance with, no industrial next to residential. So if residential gets there first, that even if it might be on that you saw the bubble map on page 17, we just want to be careful that we don't want to put industrial just by its use only and just let it flow right through without council approval if it's going to go next to residential. I'd like to see that. And I'd also like to see, if you're pulling up the map, is in the burnt orange area, for a lack of, don't judge me on my colors, folks. I think it's burnt orange. Because if the amphitheater may go in at the 27 exit, I'd like to see that purple area that does include industrial and orange, burnt orange does not. I'd like to see that line almost drawn straight across there. Now, I know I've been a part of this for a year, but as the amphitheater may or may not come into the picture here, this was clearly made before that, and I just want council and all of our citizens, everyone to know, I may suggest that that orange area be pushed up, so it's more of a straight line from orange tip to orange tip versus having the purple, which is industrial, come down closer to the amphitheater. And so I just wanted that on the record. Thank you.
Okay, yep, for sure. Any other questions or comments?
I do have a comment.
Yeah.
actually. I would also like to thank everyone, just like the whole group. They've been phenomenal, from everybody from Joe, I guess both Joes, and everyone else from the staff. They've always shown up. They've always been there. Everyone's committed that's on that committee. I can't list them all, I'm sure. Morgan or somebody might be able to mention them all. But we had quite a participation, and it's quite a commitment to do that for a year. So I want to thank everyone, whether they're mentioned or not, for their involvement in that.
Perfect, thank you so much, appreciate that. Okay, I don't see any other questions at this time. Do you want to go to Mr. Dotson?
Sure thing. Good evening, everybody. You guys have my, okay, they're getting it. They know what they're doing. Better than me. Haven't seen you all in a while. Good to see you all. I had a baby, so I was gone for a bit. Well, I didn't have a baby, thank God. My wife did all the work. And then just been plugging away on code, so, but it is good to be back in front of you all. So as Robin had mentioned, we have a slew of code updates coming through as the package 2, which is like a lot of packages in one. It'd be helped to, facilitate, implement this new comp plan, as well as just do updates that need to happen to the code that, I've discussed with you multiple times. There's discrepancies, things that don't match up in general in the codes. We're trying to do all that. Tonight, we are just going to focus on the multifamily updates, because that has been such a point of heartburn for a lot of people and council in general. We've heard your comments and want to try to address some of those concerns. So to start off, this is a noted existing structure here. And again, Robin, gave you guys, the back, the side to side, side by side, as well as the other paper copies of these images. This was just something that was permitted at the time. We don't have currently design standards, minimum design standards, both either for architectural or the site for multifamily. So sometimes this is what you get. As I know you guys are well aware, there are other multifamily sites in the city that have done a much better job at meeting what we would be proposing for our standards anyway. So again, this isn't something that's across the city for sure, but it is an example of design that could be improved and would be, in our opinion, with some of our updates. So as a general rule of what we're doing with the multifamily code, we're adding to it to beyond what the current code is, which is just internal circulation at this point. We're amending the applicability section so that we're able to capture everything that is deemed multifamily. And then we're going to add minimum site design standards that would be discussing setbacks, landscape buffering, pedestrian connectivity, as well as open space, public and private open space. We're also, as part of multifamily, but in general, parking updates, general landscaping updates for street buffers in general, and the landscape use buffers across all of the use types. So I would like to be very detailed with this slide and the next one regarding the site design standards. So these are our latest updates to what some of those minimum standards would be, what we've written as the code. So, A being multifamily residential should provide a minimum setback along the perimeter of the project of at least 15 feet, period, unless a greater setback is otherwise required. So if there's some other portion of the code, including even within the multifamily section, then that larger buffer would be required. For B, it'll provide a minimum setback of 10 feet between each building. That's more of a building fire code requirement, but it's nice to have that in there to make sure that we have that separation between the buildings. And it also allows a little bit of breezeway green space kind of between these buildings, something to let some daylight through at times. C, this is specific to some of the issues that we've been hearing. You know, when multifamily buildings are proposed and share a property line with existing single family, a minimum 25-foot setback would be required, and it would be not just a setback, but a landscape buffer along that shared property line. We are proposing 2 exceptions, one for downtown, which I think all makes sense because downtown's a whole different beast, and it will have its own design requirements in that code section. And then number 1, if it's a single-story structure, so matching essentially that height of a single-family residence, then it can maintain that 15-foot perimeter buffer rather than the 25-foot. Next portion of that, when it is across a public roadway from single-family residential, let's say a local street, typically a 10-foot landscape buffer would be required per our current land use chart. We're not proposing to amend that at the time, but this code section would show that even though a 10-foot would be required on the local street, because it's multifamily, we want 15 instead of that 10. And that extra 5 feet helps for our requirement of more mature trees, as well as denser tree and shrub landscaping, which we'll show in some of the imagery. If you don't have that extra 5 feet, it doesn't matter, and it can affect the health of the trees. For E, it's all on-site service areas, outdoor storage, waste storage, etc. Those mechanical equipment things have to be screened, and they should not, as often as possible, be placed in between the building and a street. So they should be on the quote-unquote backside of a building internal to the development. And then F is requiring private common open space, so a patio, a deck, those types of things you see. Be minimum of 60 square feet. We hope that they're separated. We were going to require them to be separated from the common area, so it can't just be pour a concrete slab that happens to just poke out into the common open space. That doesn't provide privacy for the residents, doesn't provide privacy if it happens to be on a street side elevation as well. So we're wanting to require landscaping, walls or fencing, patio covers, et cetera, to help separate the common from the private area. In addition to that, where any first floor private patios face existing single-family residential, we're requiring that it is screened with that 3-foot landscaping or fence. So this is an example of what the street buffer is currently in this area for the noted buildings. You know, as you can tell, they're meeting the requirement, our current code requirements for the landscaping width as well as the tree coverage. But with what we're proposing, it would look something similar to this, which is more trees, a denser buffer along the base that actually covers some of the mechanical equipment along the back there or front, depending on your frame of reference. It also includes some minimum undulating berms in those landscaped areas between the units to help break up just the ground cover and provide visual interest. One of the major things, as you can tell, is the quantity of trees. The proposed code would say that the trees have to touch at maturity. So that's different than just the 1 per 35 linear feet, which is what typical code throughout the valley is. Trees that touch at maturity with a wider buffer, you're allowed to stagger them, and therefore you get a denser buffer and visual screening between different uses and for the residents from the street and the noise that comes from the street. So again, this is those two side by side and what the difference can be there. Uh-oh. Did I touch something? Oh, there it is. Okay. As noted for the landscape street buffers, I just wanted to note that we did add the 15 feet, or proposing to add the 15 feet into the actual table, and this is not in the multifamily section, this is in the general landscape code, but it's applicable because applicants may look in multiple places, so we want to make sure we're covering our butts there. So that's just an additional 15-foot note in there with a footnote that says it will be for the multifamily when across from single-family residential. This is the backside of those noted buildings and why they don't have the patios on the backside, because of just at the time the way they designed it and the parking requirements, etc. This would be ideal and the way that we would prefer to have it be constructed, as well as what our design standards, our proposed design standards would push for. On the left are some of those very specific design standards regarding the actual building form. So an accent material or color would be required on each facade. Windows need to be included in order to provide visual relief, but they should be included or constructed with architectural siding, architectural trim, all of those things. Requiring a minimum of 3 colors as well as 3 different materials on each facade. And then providing roof profile variation, so it can't just be, frankly, what is kind of existing now, which is just monopoly houses back and forth across. So it'd have to have different, whether it's dormers or different types of roof profiles. Addition number 5 on this is noting, it's not shown because it's just not what's existing, but wall modulation. And it says 200 square feet, not 200 linear feet. So it's only 20 feet by 10. So what you would typically feel like is a normal, like 1 unit wide and first story floor. Once you get over that, you need to have a wall modulation. So the point of that is to help break up the massing, so you don't have one singular wall plane across an entire frontage of a building. And that would be for townhome style, as is shown here, or even a garden style design. You're gonna have to, the applicant would be required to break that building massing up with pop-outs, recesses, things like that. Again, number 6 would be noting the private open space, which is shown here with that 3 to 4 foot wall or fence, should just separating that from the common area, so that way it's actually more private for the residents, as well as depicting some visual interest for people who are just passing by, and it helps block some of those things that are located on their patio. You know, everybody likes to store, you know, chairs and things like that out there. Number 7 is kind of discussing that if you do have the same material, let's say you have that lap siding, you can do it in different formats and different directions, and that alone, even if it's the same color, can offer some visual interest and change for what residents and people who just driving by can see. And 8 would just be the lighting, where we currently don't have any minimum lighting standards, so we are proposing lighting that would be downlit, kind of in the same realm as those dark sky ordinances that are very common. This would be, again, on that same property. What the difference could be between that garden style apartment and the buffer. So you have the current buffer on the left there, and what our code would be requiring on the right. And the difference between mostly the ground cover, not to mention the number of trees, but also that ground cover, and how much more inviting and beautiful that looks when you have that additional shrub requirement and the berms and all those things. This is going back to the front side along the public roadway, what it would look like just as a head-on. And again, just noting those architectural requirements, the different materials, different colors, additional street trees. This does include notes on what the landscape buffer, you know, includes 2 to 3 foot berms. In this style, if it was a townhome style, the code is proposing to include where each unit would have to be at a different wall plane. So it would have to be back and forth, or you can have some offset by a foot, some offset by 3 feet, whatever, again, to break up that building massing, especially along a roadway. And again, this is just to reiterate current code, or I should say previous code that really doesn't have any minimum standards to what we are proposing on the right there. I think it's a very impactful image to see just those side by side. So with that, we would love input and direction on which way we want to go here. If this is sufficient, if it's, you want more or less of certain aspects of this, we definitely want the input.
Perfect, excellent. Thanks so much. Councilor Allgood.
Yeah, Joe, I have some questions, and I love what you're doing here. I appreciate that a lot. When we approve residential neighborhoods or residential subdivisions, there's a minimum amount of open space, there's required amenities. Does multifamily have that same requirement?
Currently, multifamily as a standalone use does not, unless it's through a PUD or part of a subdivision. There's a minimum 10% that comes across the board, and that's for like a general subdivision as well as multifamily. PUDs is the same thing, so yes, there is. There are very particular parts of the lot that can count towards that open space. As part of our landscape updates, we are proposing to broaden what is qualifying. but also requiring a little bit more than what would previously. So we've done some calculations, and some of the code updates that we've proposed would typically require more open space for every project than what is currently at the minimum 10%.
The particular development we're looking at here, the designated open space is hard to find, and there's zero amenities that I'm aware of. Are we missing something by that, by not requiring that stuff, or is that the general rule?
I can't speak to when this particular project had been approved, I'll be honest with you. The codes could have been different. There was some, from what I understand, 4+ years ago when it was actually approved versus when it was constructed. There is open space on the property, I know that, but whether it's 5% or 15%, I couldn't tell you off the thing. The main point we're just trying to make is that with these new code updates, we can do a much better job of requiring these things at a minimum. And then, of course, with plan review, we'll just ensure that we're complying with code. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it should be something that's on our radar by all means. And then a couple more questions, if you're okay with that. All this multifamily stuff is required to be sprinkled?
Typically, yes. Once you go over 3 units in a row, it triggers the commercial building code, which would be sprinklered, yes.
And then on multifamily like we're looking at here, are there a number of required parking spaces per unit?
Yes, so that's part of our updates. Right now, it's pretty basic of just 2 per unit. One of our updates that we're proposing is to go per bedroom and break that up a little bit more. And that's what a lot of other jurisdictions in the valley are doing. We also did calculations on what that would be I took multiple, like 6 different projects and looked at how much more parking would be required. Overall, it's an increase for every project would require more parking, which is from what I understand what council has wanted. It seems to be, depending on the project, and again, it matters on if you have 3 bedrooms versus all studio and 1 bedrooms, your parking requirement would be different because they're going to require different needs. But it would be about a 15 to 25% increase in the parking spaces from what current code requires. And that, again, just depends on the bedroom count.
And then one last question, I sorry to nail you with all these.
No problem.
I love the landscaping and stuff, the outer look. 5 years down the road, once it's built, once it's signed off on, we no longer have control of how well they maintain that landscaping. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. We have codes, even now in place, that's the maintenance of the landscaping and the quality that it needs to be maintained in. Like if a tree dies in a required open space or buffer area, again, our code enforcement's generally complaint-based, as most places in the country. If we get a call about it, we'll go out and tell them, hey, you guys need to replace this tree because it died. You're not compliant now with your approvals. So that area of the code is being updated as well, just to make sure we hit everything that we need to, regarding HOAs, property managers, et cetera. But yes, that is something that is required.
Thank you, appreciate your help.
Absolutely.
Councilor Doty?
Thank you. I like the bedroom parking requirement because we all know that at least in this environment, that people are 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, 6 families are living in one apartment. The one thing it does cause me pause is sometimes when we make absolutes on distances, because I like the outside and breaking that up. I don't like the monopoly homes, right? We want this to be a nice neighborhood for all. But sometimes life comes up, right? And what I'm more worried about is the one size fits all. So a big development, and this may stretch a little further than we're talking about tonight, but requiring a big development to put in a fire hydrant versus me just owning a single lot and saying you also have to put in a fire hydrant. And all I am is trying to improve my own little world. And not all the complaints we get with big developments. Is there an appeals process, or what do they have, a variance ask if they can't quite, like the one lot, they just can't quite get to 10 feet, but maybe they can get to 9? And I get that's a slippery slope, we don't want to go down that, but I think council's pretty good at calling that out. But I just want to make sure that people have, because what I'm hearing in the community is there is no appeals process for a fire hydrant if you get it's what the law says.
Right.
And I get that we're in charge of all of those, meaning council. However, the statute's quite big. The legislature's in charge of quite a large amount of code books, right?
Sure.
Right, Counselor, all good? Yeah. And, well, not anymore, I guess you're done now, but, my point is that we've gotta have a way for people to come in, and certainly not just approve everything and people learn, like, hey, they'll just approve it if you do a variance on it. But that there is a way that sometimes life, the sidewalk just happens to jog left right there, and now we go, nope, your whole project's off.
Right.
Requiring a fire hydrant for someone that's just trying to improve their own, with their own shop on their own property versus someone developing a huge property that's gonna make that money back. I see Counselor Dittenberg shaking his head, someone that's gotta pave an alley when you're trying to do things as a nonprofit for the community versus a big developer doing that.
Sure.
I just wanna make sure that there is also a way to appeal, whether that's to council or through some process that you can just say, my whole thing's been thrown off and I can't afford a fire hydrant. But a developer can go, certainly if I'm building 350 homes, I can throw in a fire hydrant, that's not a problem. So
Sure.
is there I don't know if appeal is the right way, but can they ask for a variance on any of this? Or
So, first, it's a great question. I should have mentioned that, but it's a good question and a good thought there, and we've thought of that as well. I can't speak to the fire hydrant example specifically, because
I was
again,
just trying to use it to illustrate.
fire
an
code
issue.
is fire code, right?
Yeah.
Life safety stuff. But regarding these, yes, we have written an entire, well, two parts of the answer here. One, we've written an entire alternative methods of compliance section, which would be administrative reviews. This whole multifamily code section is applicable or available to that, would be a director level decision of reducing those buffers in those instances. Let's say it is a 4-acre parcel and, you know, they have a canal or something, they're constrained and they, again, meeting that 25-foot buffer, they're just like, I can't make this work, but hey, you know, I'm gonna
But
put
everything
denser
else is
landscape,
perfect,
yeah, but
right?
everything else is
Just
good.
this one spot.
It's just this one spot, I just can't make this quite fit with the parking requirements, with the opens, everything required, right? Can we just reduce this buffer, making sure that we're adding some extra trees or something? That's absolutely what we intend to use that code section for. There
So
is,
it will be written in the code section?
yes, currently there is theoretically a place for people to do that now. They can ask for, not waivers, deviations from some of those strict requirements, where we look at different landscaping requirements and say, hey, yeah, because of the existing site or whatever it may be, we'll allow you to reduce this buffer, or,
I just want to make sure, because absolutes are pretty tough, because we're trying to put everybody into one basket. right?
Absolutely.
And I just want to make sure there's a way that,
there is,
whether we agree with what they're trying to do or not, at least we'll hear them out
yep.
and make it they can appeal one more level versus us
Yes.
just holding up the code and saying,
Oh, no.
next in line, right?
There's
I
the
want a
administrative process, and then even if, let's say it's coming through with a larger project, whether it's a SUP or even through a PUD or annexation, especially if it's annexation, council has a lot of power
Right,
at
there's
that point.
certain ones that are very easy,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, these general ones, so.
Yeah,
okay.
the general ones, there is an administrative process, absolutely.
Thank you.
Counselor Dittenberg.
Thank you. I really appreciate the visual representation and the explanation that you've provided. My comments kind of go back to what Counselor Allgood and Counselor Doty have said, and maybe tiptoe into an area that maybe Commissioner Harmon would like to answer. I see him sitting over there, you know, kind of wondering whether or not he's going to get involved. And that is, I've been in public housing for 30 years, and this deferred maintenance issue that comes up. We build something nice, we build something new, and then in an effort to keep something manageable and affordable, the deferred maintenance goes by the way. And nice little private patios with fences that are next to heat pumps that are now making a lot of noise are unused and now cluttered with stuff. So while we're doing improved design features, is there going to be improved code enforcement to make sure we have the best looking building at construction to be the almost best looking building 5 years down the road?
Mayor and Councilor Dittenberg, that's a fantastic question. There is something called the International Property Maintenance Code. The city has adopted it, however, they only adopted a certain portion of it. If we, as a city, which I would recommend us looking at, the property maintenance code, it does allow more enforcement mechanism for even things such as chipping paint, guardrails that are falling off all on the ground, all of those types of things. It's very beneficial in a community because it does help with those things that a typical, I would say a typical nuisance code doesn't take care of. You can even get into regulating, helping with tenant landlord issues. I wouldn't recommend that. But I would recommend adopting the parts that does take care of the exterior maintenance of the buildings and the sites and all of those things that go with that.
So for Commissioner Harmon, so as a developer, as a builder, and you look at this, are you looking at how you're going to get into Robin's office to request a variance?
Yeah, I liked Councilman Doty's thing about having the appeals, like an appeals board. Do we have an appeals board in the city of Caldwell? Because I know where I came from before, I was actually served on an appeals board. It's not used very often, but sometimes.
So that's kind of what the council, so there's the administrative determination where you can apply for certain, up to a certain percentage, and it can go to the director. And then if the director denies it or it's above that, then the council would serve as that appeals board. Then, so that.
The council would service it.
The city council,
It
yep,
wouldn't be a
would go.
separate appeals board with a, kind of like a planning and zoning board or commission or something. Okay. But no, I do like this too. I drive past those apartments all the time.
Yeah,
And every time I drive by them, I'm like, how'd this ever get approved?
yeah.
But that whole thing that you showed, and that is fantastic.
Then kind of touching on that, sorry, Robin, with these ones, so how they did get approved is they didn't have to get approved. It was an allowed use.
Oh, gotcha.
So at the time that these were built, multifamily was allowed in this zone. And so that's where a lot of those requirements, like what Joe was talking about, as you go through a subdivision process, things like that, you get that open space requirement, the things of that nature, the playgrounds that are required. This was just an outright allowed use. And so there was no special requirements, nothing of that nature. It's not anymore. The code has been changed. So if these tried to come today at this property, they could not. But that's how that kind of ended up. There was no design review at the time either, like we're talking about now, which I think would be good. Because there would be obviously application fees with that, and then that would pay for the design review staff, I'm guessing, in that regards. But yeah, at the time, there was no requirement. It was just allowed use, and so they could basically just go and build it. So that's how those got there.
Okay.
Mayor and councilors, just to kind of touch on a couple little things back on that. Joe's correct, we'll have an alternative method of compliance application that people can submit. There is already an appeal process to move forward. We'll also be looking at an infill development ordinance to have some relief for these smaller infill properties, and criteria for that will help with things like setbacks, landscaping, potentially open space and those types of things. Be the smaller lots. We haven't quite determined what that infill acreage will be. Not sure if that's under 4 acres, if it's under 2 acres. We're kind of doing some research on that right now. But I think there'll be a lot of options for people. And I had one other thought, and I completely lost it, so I don't even know where it went to now. Maybe it'll come back to me in a second.
Yeah,
Mr.
Commissioner
Mayor, I
Harmon?
have one more question.
Yep.
And this is something I was trying to look up too. So I know we're having, in the state and locally, we're having a lot of fire issues. Fire, like what's going to be required to have fire sprinklers in it or not? And am I correct that is duplexes not?
They do not.
They're not required to have them, but a multifamily like this does.
Yeah, once it gets over the
Okay.
3 or more attached units.
And if I could just add a little caveat to that, I'm obviously not the fire marshal, but for example, this one we're looking at there, typically that would, however, and Robin actually would be great to correct me on this if I'm wrong, if you separate them, right? So basically you're telling us that if you actually create a separation that meets fire code requirements, then you wouldn't have to sprinkle, like even if there's 5 or 6 in a row, as long as you
That's what
separated those out.
That's what I was kind of thinking. That's kind of like that duplex.
Yeah, so basically the fire's gonna stop there.
Yeah.
So it can't go on to the 3rd or 4th or whatever it is, so.
And the only reason I was asking, because that's coming up big throughout the county, throughout a lot of stuff right now.
Sure,
Is a big issue. So with residential.
makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Counselor Allgood.
I was just gonna respond to that same thing. In the legislature this year, it came in late, so it didn't go anywhere. But they're trying to pass a building code to where a firewall separation on a fourplex would eliminate the requirement for sprinklers. That was being discussed at the end of the session, and I'm sure it'll come back again this year. Yeah.
Mayor, I remembered what
Yes.
I was going to say. See, it came
found
back to
it.
me. I know, right? In the code, or in the comp plan, you'll see where they have like a minimum, maximum density, and then it'll have what's called a density bonus program. So we're writing a program now. In the past, you've seen developments come in and it's just, oh, if it's mixed use, you get to quadruple the density. Well, we're gonna actually have a density bonus program, and one of the things that we're gonna say in there is, hey, you can increase your density by a lot more, but you need to provide certain things to us, and we're gonna come up with a list of what that is, so we'd love some feedback from council on what you'd like to see. But some of the things we're looking at is maybe some of them are actually deed-restricted affordable housing, so we know we're truly getting affordable housing. Could be income restricted, could be, are they willing to donate land to the city and build parks, or give us land for police and fire stations. So we're gonna have some big criteria that we wanna write in there, that if they wanna get these big density increases, they're gonna have to give us something pretty significant in return.
Yeah, and those are nice too, because it's not us demanding it. Like if they, so it's kind of good. If they want it, they can do it and go for it and get that bonus, then we get something in return, not you will do this because we tell you to. It's up to them.
Absolutely,
So,
because
which
the
is
Idaho
great.
statutes don't allow us to have inclusionary zoning in Idaho, so we can't say you have to do this, but what we can say is, if you want this as an incentive, then you need to give us this. And so that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, that'd be great. Any other questions this time? Okay, very good. Do you have anything else, or
That's it.
that's it? Congratulations, by the way, for
Thank
your,
you.
your baby and to your
Appreciate it.
wife,
Yes.
on that.
They're both
Anything else, Robin, that you wanted to?
No, unless you guys have more.
Do you mind coming up and just, is there any final questions or thoughts from any of the commissioners or city councilors and what you saw, what you thought, anything of that nature? Commissioner Boutros?
Thank you. In looking at the overall plan and knowing the challenges that we've faced in the Planning and Zoning Commission in the past, the idea of annexations and city boundary growth comes up. Is this plan intended to restrict or stop future annexations that would typically, in our situation, would grow west? I'm not talking about infill. Or is it possible that they would continue? What we've seen is applications are handled on a case-by-case basis. So when we look at the density of a particular application, it's not like, well, we're going to do a very high density here and that gives us relief someplace else. The someplace else could still be high density if they request a rezone and if it gets approved.
Mayor and Commissioner Boutros, I don't think this plan is intended to prevent annexations, but what it is intended to do is control what we see in those annexations. So like, as you see the green on the borders, those are not gonna be able to have high density in them. Those are low density, very low density zones. Somebody would have to come in for a rezone and it would not be in compliance with our comprehensive plan. And because we've put extensive work into this plan and extensive input from the public, staff is not gonna recommend, if somebody wants to come in for a comp plan amendment, we're not gonna recommend approval of a comp plan amendment. The idea being that this is our plan moving forward, and we want to see this plan come into fruition, and have that density, like I said, more of that density in the core where services already are. And then transition to lower density as you get further outside the core of the city. So we are gonna be asking for a little bit of an expansion. We'll be coming before P and Z and council sometime next year, a little bit of an expansion in our impact area, but only in the still urban areas where we already have services and we're already growing. There's already stuff there. We'll have areas outside of our impact area, which are still just planning areas. And those are just so that we can be ahead of the game if down the road, 15, 20 years from now, we have grown out there to that area and we're not sprawling anymore, that we still have planned beyond that so that we're ready for it. Plus, we do get some, requests from people that are outside of, our impact area that want to build and they need services, but they're not even close to being ready to annex. So we provide municipal services with the agreement that if we ever get out there and we grow, that they will annex into the city. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Counselor Doty?
Just a couple comments. Robin touched on it, the area impact. We did shrink it though.
Yep.
Depending how you look at a map, west or south. If you're looking at the freeway, sometimes it doesn't always run east-west like it's supposed to. So we did shrink that and head up towards Purple Sage area. So the area of impact has changed and we're trying to hold that line. And that was also by statute, right, Counselor Allgood, that the area impact could only stretch so far. So
Yep.
eventually one day, maybe when we're all long gone, clearly we might go outside of that, but it is restricted by Idaho statute.
That's correct. We also shrunk our planning area as well. Thank you for bringing that up. Our planning area used to extend, I'm going to get this wrong, north, south, east, west, I guess, southwest. It went all the way out to Chicken Dinner Road. We have pulled that way, way back. So we are now only going as far as Wagner. Yeah.
Commissioner Herman?
Mine's real quick. What is the minimum lot size in that green area?
It depends on
probably
if you're in an RS1 or an RS2, because there's going to be two zones in there. I believe the one that's closest to the county, it's like 43,000 something square feet
Okay.
for your minimum lot size. The one that's going to border the county.
It's neighborhood
Okay.
one, does that help you?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilman Allgood?
Sorry.
I know. In the downtown color on this, is every residential, I'm hoping the answer is yes, but is every residential project an SUP?
That is going to be up to council. That's going to be a council decision on if you want that to be an SUP or not. Currently, any multifamily is an SUP outside of the downtown. I think in the downtown, it's just outright permitted. I can't remember. We'll look that up. I think in the downtown, it's outright permitted. I can't remember.
I don't know. I would.
Yeah, and you may want to look at, because this downtown, this includes Memorial Park, all those homes around there, so I don't know if you want to require those to be a special use, but in the core of the downtown, so it may be within what's the downtown
The city
district, whatever you
center.
call it, the city center
Yeah.
would require that, but like I said, if, because there's a lot of homes right there along Memorial Park.
Right.
So I'd hate to see them have to do a special use permit, because it is a little ways,
Well-
but right in the core of it, for sure, but again, it's up to
And I don't
council.
know what everybody else's preference is. My preference is in the core, any residential would come before council. And then secondly, in the area you're talking about, I don't know that it needs to come before council, but that's an older part of Caldwell that I see redeveloping in the future. And I think we should have some idea of how that happens in that area of town, because again, between downtown Caldwell and Memorial Park is a bit historical, and I can see our downtown amenities moving that direction, so I would like to see some control there. And then one that's a small subject, but we discussed it last year, is at some time in the past, the council passed a rule where we do not have gated subdivisions in Caldwell. And we had some discussion about maybe changing that ordinance.
Yes, and I think we're still looking at that. We're working with engineering and fire on that and how that can work. Because lots of other communities have gated subdivisions and they have the ability to install something to open the gates for emergency safety. So I do think that we should allow that in our community, especially in some of these nicer upper scale subdivisions or custom homes or whatever. I think it'll be beneficial, and we've had a lot of requests for that, so we're definitely looking into that. Along with that too, along with that, but it made me think of this thought. Currently, right now, the only thing we bond for landscaping is for subdivisions. That's been problematic because we also haven't been bonding for public amenities or bonding for commercial projects or something that's not a subdivision. So we are rewriting the ordinances to allow us to require developers to bond for their landscaping and public amenities if they can't complete it in time. This will allow the city to have basically some teeth if a developer goes belly up and doesn't finish their public amenities, or they don't put their landscaping in when they're supposed to. It will give us the ability to have that done and put in so that those communities are complete.
Councilor Denver?
Yes, thank you for all your work in this and your staff. This is a great plan, what we were able to see of it. I would suspect there's a lot of code writing that takes place now. So when I'm done saying what I'm saying, and if there's a question in there, you can tell me what you fear most, putting the plan together or writing the code. But having said that, I appreciate Logan Simpson's work, and I appreciate all of your staff's work in doing this. And one of the things I'm most appreciative of, and I hope we get to see this more regularly at city council, and that's that little slide rule that you have there, where low intensity equals low revenues and high cost, and higher density equals higher revenues and lower costs, because those are things that we grapple with as a city all the time. And it is not possible to have no growth but yet higher wages and more police officers. And so we just need to be really considerate that the way we pay for the services that we need and the way we pay for growth is a good mix of higher revenue generating and higher density projects. And there's no simple way to put it. So, which is harder, the plan or the code?
The code writing is absolutely the hardest. Because, you know, when you develop the comprehensive plan, you're really looking to the community to help guide you and the elected officials and everything. And so you're not doing it by yourself. You're doing it with an army, a team of people that are advocating for the same goal. But trying to write the code to implement the plan has been probably, I don't know, Joe, would you agree, has been the most. He's lying. He's banging his head on the wall most of the days, no. We've actually been working on writing these codes for just about a year. Our goal is to bring the comp plan to you in February and have the ordinances that will implement the comp plan the very next city council meeting. So.
Okay. Councilor Godey?
Just a couple things, Mr. Mayor. And this council never has varying opinions either, right? When you're writing that code, we're always spot on with each other. I would just say, do you want to give the website just a shout out for people that I hear YouTube's not working very well, so maybe if they watch it back, it will be fine on YouTube, and that we're still accepting comments, right? Because we have a meeting coming up in a couple weeks. So
Absolutely.
now is your time. If you haven't done so already, now's the time.
Yes, please, if you haven't, participated in it, or even if you have, take a look at the website because things have evolved and changed since the very beginning of it. And the website is plancaldwell.com. So it's pretty easy. Just go on there. It's interactive. You can click on it, leave your comments. All of those get tallied and then those get brought back. And that's how changes happen. And that's how we can make this plan move forward with a joined vision for everybody.
Website one more time.
plancaldwell.com.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you so much. And a huge shout out again to the staff, to you on everything. Just one last note on this before we wrap up. It was noted in Joe, the Joe on the TV, not the Joe here, when he was talking about the health initiative that kind of went along with it. And I think that's a double win because we want a healthy, vibrant community out doing active things, being of that nature. Then also that I know you and I were able to work on that along with Chris Ramos to get that grant. And was it $30,000? Do you remember?
It was $30,000, and I owe it all to my senior planner, Joe Dotson, because he wrote that grant with Chris. And so, it's been great to have that as part of the initiative in our comprehensive plan. We talk about it in the office all the time, that after this is adopted, I could see a APA award for the city of Caldwell.
That's right. Very good. So yeah, we always love that, being able to use other people's money. So, and a huge shout out to the Blue Cross of Idaho Foundation. They provide so many grants like that. I know I was also able to get a $20,000 one for Lions Park, which, by the way, I know David left. He was here. I thought I saw him here earlier. Yeah. So the barbecue grills have been installed at Lions Park at the new shade structure, and the receptacles for the ashes have been down there. And that was all part of that grant I was able to get through the Blue Cross of Idaho Foundation to do that. So a huge shout out to them for providing all of that, those opportunities. So thank you so much to everybody, our city councilors, and to our commissioners as well for joining us this evening. We appreciate that, and Robin for putting this together. And with that, we will stand adjourned at this time.
I just want to give one last shout out. Our hearing examiner is with us tonight as well. So thank you for coming and joining us.